Welcome to Ward Talk. This is Bonnie Gabowitz. Today, we're talking with Elizabeth Nelson from Ward 4. We'll be talking about her ward and what other things are happening in the city of Ann Arbor. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you for having me, Bonnie. It's good to be here.
And this is a winter day here in February of 2022. We're still in the winter season, so we have some things to talk about that relate to not only the weather, but also what's going on with the city. Let's start out with what's happening in your ward in particular. I know some things go on in your ward that also affect other wards in the city, but let's just start with your ward.
Well, the couple of big things that are happening right now is we are anticipating work at the Churchill Downs Park. It's going to be a stormwater basin, and so we had a really interesting meeting last week about what that's going to look like. It's going to be a long-term project. The park will actually be closed between April and November of this year. But the hope is that it's going to alleviate a lot of the stormwater problems in that western part of Ward 4 in the Lawton neighborhood. And the other thing that's happening is since the Valhalla development was approved, we're just tonight, actually, we're having a meeting to discuss the reconfiguration of traffic on South Main to accommodate a good number of cars that are going to be in and out of that development. And that's just.
And how many units, families are actually going to be in this development? How large?
I think it's about 450 units. So it's quite sizable, and it does not line up to the intersection at Scioto Church. And so there's going to be a temptation there for people coming out on Main. It'll be a right turn only. There's going to be a temptation for people to want to do a U. And there's a traffic island that's at about that juncture of South Main and Ann Arbor Saline Road that they're going to reconfigure to make safer.
Great. And what else? Is anything else happening specifically with Ward 4?
Well, we're rezoning, or we're talking about rezoning South State Street corridor, and that's just adjacent to Briarwood Mall. So that we would be looking at quite a lot of changes over there.
All right. Would you say some of this work that's being done in rerouting traffic or creating different traffic patterns is specifically related to the new developments of housing?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. It's one of the changes that you can expect when we have these new developments. You have to anticipate how cars are going to come in and out. And Ward 4, both of the parts that I mentioned, Valhalla and again, South State Street, these are adjacent to exits off 94. And so we're legitimately going to have significantly more traffic, both going towards the city and going outside the city. So.
Okay, so we'll continue looking at how that project is going in the coming months. Let's talk about the city now. We have presently the American Rescue Plan, which involves looking at how several millions of dollars are going to be used for the city. That is federal funding. And I know you just closed the period of time in which citizens were invited to give input as to how this money was going to be spent. First of all, how much money are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about $24 million, which is pretty exciting. And I'm actually really pleased that we engaged in the public engagement that we did, because when the list of proposals was originally presented to council, the timeline presented by then interim city administrator was to have it all a done deal and approved by early December. And I was pushing for more public engagement. So I am glad that we actually did carry that out, but there are still some challenges. The arts community, the public arts community was very concerned that there was no piece of the recommendations that involved any kind of promotion of arts or support for arts. And I saw somebody point out on social media just the other day that, there are projects related to stormwater management that have been put off for the lack of funds. And I'm glad we had a little more conversation about how to use these funds. I'm hopeful about more conversation moving forward about the best use of these funds.
Mhm. So tell me, what is the process now that you've closed the discussion, getting input? What is the process now for looking at your choices and looking at what the community is suggesting? How does that work?
I'm actually curious to see it myself. We we actually experienced quite a lot of upheaval and transition that was unexpected around the time that we would have been having discussion about these plans. And so it was what we were told was going to start out as an internal process, turned into a list of recommendations that included some pet projects from council members. And so I actually do not know. I know that a lot of it is going to be happening at City Hall among our city administrator's office. And yeah, I honestly do not know.
And is there a time frame now where you've adjusted a deadline, or is it just going to evolve as it evolves?
Well, so there are requirements about when this money must be spent and when it must be committed. We have actually quite a long timeline. I don't have it at my fingertips, but there isn't actually a rush to commit these funds. We have months to commit them, and we have years to actually spend them. And so the shortened timeline that was the original proposal was alarming to me. I'm glad that we've given ourselves more time to think about this, because like I said, members of the community have pointed out things that we missed in the list of recommendations.
Yeah, and it's hard to wrap around that amount of money.
It's a lot, yeah.
And is this money all totally new money that you weren't expecting, that was not in the budget at all? Or was there a certain amount that the city would have gotten anyway? Is this all totally new, unexpected funding?
My understanding is that it's totally new. We've known for some time that we were going to get it, obviously, because there was discussion about it last year, but it is new. And what's different about this money is that it does have some strings attached to it. There are rules about what it can be used for. We're not supposed to be starting new projects that would not be funded in the future were it not for this money. And so that actually is one of the criticisms that I have heard to the universal basic income proposal. They've intentionally framed it as a pilot for a limited period of time, but as a general parameter of this funding, the city is not supposed to be starting a program. For instance, if we created a new department within the city and staffed it, and then we had no anticipated funds to pay for it after we ran out, like that would not be an appropriate use of the funds.
Right.
And so
it's basically to support ongoing needs right now, not start anything new, is basically what you're saying.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll definitely be looking to see what the progress on this is in the next few months. So we'll keep in touch. But basically now it's closed as in terms of citizens being able to give input. That's pretty much done, or is there a little trickle of information that they can still send?
Well, I would encourage all residents to continue to reach out to council with concerns that you have. I know that I saw an MLive article about the results of the survey. I think the MLive article said that 2,500 people had responded. Well, 2,500 seems like a large number, except when you consider how many people live here. And so anybody who is reading what the results of that survey were and is alarmed that something was missing or something wasn't even included, I think that these conversations are ongoing. So I encourage everybody to write to City Council with concerns that you have or ideas that you have.
Great. Okay. Let's talk about it. It seems to be apropos today. We're having rain and snow, and there have been continuing problems with drainage and stormwater throughout the whole city. Did you want to add anything as to what new things are being done to maintain it? I know you mentioned it before. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that?
Well, I mean, I think this is sort of an ongoing problem. Every time that something new is built, it's changing the landscape of where water has been flowing. The water starts finding different places to flow, and it's sort of an ongoing conversation. Uh, are we every time we build something new, are the rules that we have in place, are the requirements that are imposed on a development enough to make up for the changes that are happening? And I know that it's often said that when you build something new, the requirements for stormwater accommodation are actually going to make things better. We hear that a lot, actually. We heard that with Valhalla, I believe, because there were drainage issues that the university raised, and the developer was explaining, well, no, we're actually going to make it better. And a lot of these things you don't know until it happens. You don't know until it's built. And so you can bump into residents who will point to the development behind them and say, they promised us that it would get better, or they promised us that it wouldn't get bad, and it's gotten worse. So I think a lot of these things, on paper, it looks like it's going to work great, and we don't know until it happens. But the Churchill Downs Park project is one of several that we're just trying to find the money to piece them together. I mean, that particular one is more complicated because it's through the County Drain Commission. And so it's not even so much a city project, it's more of a county project, but we are working with them to make sure that it's creating all the advantages that the neighborhood is looking for. For instance, there's going to be a new pedestrian access to that edge of the neighborhood up to Scioto Church. Because there were streets that ended, but you couldn't effectively, as a pedestrian, you couldn't effectively get from the edge of that neighborhood up to Scioto Church without winding around the neighborhood to get back to an access point. So that's kind of exciting. And those conversations are fun because those meetings for that basin, particularly as the neighborhood is anticipating changes to those parks, that particular park, they're asking questions like, can we make sure that when you do the basin, you design a place that's appropriate for children to sled at? So that, it's exciting whenever there's a project like this, there are opportunities, extra opportunities maybe we didn't even anticipate.
Right. Okay. And when we come back from our break, we have several other important topics to discuss. So we'll be talking about some more things when we get back. This is Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk. We invite you to contact us if you have any questions or comments. You could email us at ctn@a2gov.org. You could also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. We'll be right back.
Ottawa is about to be one of the first cities in Canada with advisory cycling lanes. Popular in Europe and in the US, the system is great for adding cycling lanes to streets where they wouldn't otherwise fit, narrow roads with low volume traffic and low speeds. Here's how they work. Traffic from both sides share one center lane. Cycling lanes are placed on each side of the road. When there are two drivers traveling in opposite directions, the vehicles move into the cycling lanes to pass each other safely. What happens if there's a bike in the cycling lane? Whoever is in front has the right of way. Vehicles travel behind the bike, but can then move back into the center lane when it is safe to do so. It is a whole new way for drivers and cyclists to share the road.
The locations for the advisory bike lanes in Ann Arbor have been deployed on East Summit Street, Granger between State Street and Packer, and in the downtown on East William Street and South First Avenue.
This is Bonnie Gabowitz, and we're continuing with Ward Talk. We're speaking with Elizabeth Nelson from Ward 4. Elizabeth, we have something new going on. We've got a bridge that is by the University Hospital, Medical Center Drive Bridge, and they're looking to improve the conditions and widen it so that it's safer and allows a better flow of traffic. Could you talk to us about what they're trying to do with that and how it's going?
Sure. Yeah, this is kind of a remarkable project because it's often a topic of conversation how much the university is a sort of a burden on the city resources. It's also framed as a benefit. Obviously, there are advantages to having a university in town, but in a lot of ways they cause a wear and tear on our infrastructure, and there's no obligation that they contribute to fixing it. And so this is a rare situation where they have offered to help us fix it, help us pay for fixing it.
I think that just goes to show really the importance of doing something about fixing it if they're willing to help out.
Exactly. And so they have offered to pay 50% of the cost of rehabilitating this bridge and 100% of the cost of widening it. And the widening that they want to execute is just a turn lane. It's a very, very short stretch of roadway to help access in and out of the hospital. And it became controversial because as part of the plan, they're also reallocating sidewalk space. So that those sidewalks on either side of that bridge were fairly wide, 10.5 feet on both sides. And they studied the issue. They worked with city staff actually in studying designs for the bridge. And they came up with an idea for expanding the east side and promoting non-motorized transit on that side and slightly narrowing the sidewalk on the west side. And so the points of controversy were really people who opposed expansion of the bridge and opposed narrowing of that one sidewalk on the one side.
Were they looking to offer space for cycles?
Yes. So the idea was that the city staff and university representatives and consultants that they hired assessed that the east side would be safer for that travel. And so a 14.5-foot path was going to allow for multimodal travel. And it was community members raised the issue. Well, there are still people who want to people on bicycles and pedestrians who want to travel on that west side. And you shouldn't make that side narrow at all. And the university said that they were going to step away from the project if we put too many limits on this. If the opposition to the turn lane, they said, was an absolute deal breaker. Mm-hmm. And so we had one council meeting in October, I think it was, where it was proposed well, we'll move forward with this, but we're going to say no extra turn lane and no narrowing of sidewalks. And that meant that we were going to lose millions of dollars. And that amendment failed this last time when it came back. And we're still hearing from community members. I met with representatives from the university last week. It looks like we might be able to strike a compromise where the university would have that turn lane, but perhaps we can get enough money together to add a couple of feet to the west sidewalk, the sidewalk on the west side. So there would effectively be no narrowing on either side. There would only be expansion. Mm-hmm. But the turn lane is a deal breaker. And people have pitched arguments about we don't want to expand roads because that's just encouraging more vehicle travel. But this is a very unique situation. Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues at the table last week compared this lane expansion to highways in LA, which was not really an appropriate comparison because it's such a short stretch of roadway. And it's just leading into a medical center. We're not turning Ann Arbor into LA's interstate system or highway system by adding a turn lane for 50 feet, or it's literally measured in feet, the expansion of the roadway for this turn lane. So hopefully we'll be able to arrive at a compromise that satisfies everybody.
Mm-hmm. And is there a timeline or is it pretty loose?
No, the timeline is pretty tight, actually. The university asked us to bring it back and put it on an agenda last week precisely because in order for this to move forward, we needed to get it settled and sorted out.
Okay, so we'll continue checking in on that. Thank you for that. Also, we have some movement in trying to improve the situation with the what's called the early leasing ordinance. There was some discussion about having more fairness for renters in terms of being told when they had to renew their lease. And there's an ordinance, and I know you in particular wanted to have just cause for eviction included in this ordinance. So tell us a little bit about this particular ordinance and what you've been supporting.
Yeah, this was really a hard fought battle last year, trying to get some measure of protections in place for tenants. And I had to be educated on the issue because I have never rented in the center of Ann Arbor, where this is really the biggest problem. But we were trying to alleviate some of the pressure on these tenants to commit to leases so very, very early. And last summer, I was meeting regularly with student leaders from the university, attorneys who provide legal services to students, and city attorneys trying to craft a solution. And I was unsuccessful in getting just cause for eviction. Just cause for eviction would have been a really elegant solution. A number of communities already have it. The idea is that if you have a lease and you're a good tenant, you're not violating terms, and the landlord doesn't have a pretty good reason for getting rid of you, you're going to have the right to renew that lease. And every community that has implemented this, if you read the list of exceptions to it, you realize they're very, very reasonable. Like if you have a property and you want to renovate it and you're not going to be able to have a tenant in there, that's an exception. Of course, you can get your tenant out and say, like, you can't renew your lease. If you have a family member, your niece wants to rent it, that's fine too. Of course, you can't keep the same tenant. And obviously, if you have a bad tenant who's not paying their rent or is violating the terms of their lease, clearly they do not have a right to renew. And so the fact that we didn't get right to renew, it's also just cause for eviction. The fact that we were not able to implement, and it has caused a great deal of confusion. And this leasing season in particular has been very challenging for tenants because the early leasing ordinance suggested that they had a longer timeline before they had to make a decision. But behind the scenes, local landlords had figured out so many loopholes, generating wait lists, committing apartments without technically signing a lease, because the ordinance simply restricted signing a lease. You couldn't sign a lease before a certain date, but landlords are basically committing the apartments to other people and promising them to other people and taking deposits early as well.
And also, wouldn't this somehow allow landlords to maybe look to get higher rates by not continuing someone's lease if they want to really jack up the rental rate?
Well, now this is one of the challenges that I'm in conversation with local attorneys about how to address. So typically, ordinances around just cause for eviction also have restrictions that, you can't just say, all right, you can renew, but I'm doubling your rent. They typically have some element of restriction on how much you can increase the rent. And when in an early draft last summer, we had a version of just cause for eviction that included a requirement that the terms of renewal be the same as what would be extended to any other tenant. And so if you anticipated that you wanted to raise the rent by 10%, that's fine, that's legit, but you're raising it 10% because that's how you would market it to anyone else.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, why wasn't this ordinance, what's the reasoning for not supporting it? The just cause. I know you supported it, but what was the reasoning behind other council members who didn't support it?
Well, I have to say the landlord association in town is very strong. The Washtenaw Area Apartment Association were really, really very angry. They're advocating on behalf of landlords, and landlords want as much flexibility as they possibly can. I think that's really the reason. And they also threatened litigation. But my own take on this is that there are times when it's appropriate for us to take a stand. We took a stand just recently on discrimination in rental housing, and the landlords threatened litigation. They threatened litigation on the early leasing ordinance, and they dropped that. That was kicked out. A threat of litigation is very different than what is likely to happen, or a threat of litigation shouldn't be a brick wall in my mind. The reasons that laws change is that people push to the edge of them and are a little bit bolder. So I'm hopeful about moving forward. Like I said, this leasing season really highlighted and underlined just how bad the problems are. And so I am hopeful about us moving forward with some version of just cause for eviction. I mean, particularly since we're going to have a rental commission seated. This is an issue that we profess to care about. And if we really care about it, I think we should be like putting our policy where our mouth is.
Would it help for more citizens to be putting their 2 cents into their council members?
Well, I think when we have something on the table, that will be the time to have a conversation about it. And I try really hard on my blog to encourage people to understand these issues and get the information. And if we have community conversations about these issues, I feel like we can get to a good place. I think it's harder when those conversations don't happen. I mean, this particular issue impacts a whole lot of people. And I have to say, renters outnumber landlords by quite a lot. And so if we're crafting policy based on what the landlords want, I think we're going about it wrong.
Okay, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but I definitely wanted to talk about municipal power, because you are moving forward with looking into options. So tell us where we're at with that now.
So what has happened is council approved an RFP, a request for proposals, on a feasibility study for municipal power. This is an assessment to help the city understand the advantages, the disadvantages, how it would work, if it would work, how to make it happen. And what I'm hearing from advocates, I mean, it's exciting this is moving forward. I tried to move this forward last fall and it got punted and delayed. We are finally moving forward. What advocates are telling me is that we should be paying close attention to how this RFP is structured, how the study is structured, because this is one of those things, one of those major investments where if you look at it in a short time frame, it doesn't look like there's going to be an advantage to it. But if you study it long term, the payoff comes later. And so depending on how this study is structured, advocates tell me they can sort of paint the picture that they want. And so if there's not an interest in moving towards municipal power, this feasibility study can be framed, on a short timeline and say, oh my gosh, it's going to cost this overwhelming amount of money. If you study it over a longer timeline, then it's clear that there is an actual payoff. I'm told that in other communities, municipal power generates profit for a city.
So who's in charge of the study?
I think that's in our sustainability department. I think Dr. Stoltz is and other staff are putting the RFP together. So they're going to say that this is what we want in a feasibility study, and then it's going to be advertised and we will get bids. People will offer. I'm told there's a pretty small number of people who are qualified to do a feasibility study of this sort, but we will be setting the parameters of what it will look like and what kind of information we are looking for.
Okay, well, it seems that we have a lot of really big issues going forward, moving, and we're looking forward to continuing our discussion in our next session as well. I'd like to thank you for visiting with us and updating us on these important issues.
Thank you for having me, Bonnie. It's always a good conversation.
And it's a pleasure for me. And it's a pleasure for you to be visiting with us. We look forward next month on Ward Talk. Until then, stay healthy. Goodbye.